On today's show, how are the Columbus Blue Jackets prospects doing? We'll look at that in detail on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the Columbus Blue Jackets prospect pool in detail. We'll start with the prospects playing in the NHL and Adam Fantilli, Kent Johnson, and Cole Sillinger. In the second segment, we'll look at the AHL prospects and how they're doing. And finally, we'll look at the junior and other prospects in the prospect pool, the likes of Cayden Lindstrom, Luca Morelli, Luca Pinelli, Oiva Keskinen is doing great over in the Finnish Liga, and other prospects like that. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the prospects in the NHL for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And the conversation starts with Adam Fantilli. He was the second overall pick in the Connor Bedard draft, the 2023 NHL draft. Blue Jackets ended up drafting at third overall and selected Adam Fantilli after the Anaheim Ducks selected Leo Carlsson at number 2. That was a debate. And how's it going so far for Columbus regarding their pick of Fantilli?
I mean, I still don't think that they're complaining whatsoever with having landed a player who in many eyes was the second best of his draft class at third overall. But it's been a bit of a slower transition to the NHL for Fantilli than it has been for Leo Carlsson. Carlsson's been a really smooth transition to the NHL for Anaheim, certainly helped by the fact that he was acclimated in a really intelligent way, being played big minutes, but not every single game last season to kind of get adjusted to the NHL pace and intensity. And this season, he's also up to 11 points in 20 games with Anaheim. But Fantilli has been playing a really solid role for the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's been showing his physicality. He's been playing really well off puck as well, rather than just being that puck hound, the puck dominant forward that he was throughout his entire draft year. And he's gotten a bit more conservative with his puck touches, which he needed to be at the NHL level. And even though the production hasn't been amazing with Columbus so far this season for Fantilli, he has 5 goals and 13 points in 26 games, which puts him at 7th in team scoring. I still think that he's been progressing his game, even though the production hasn't quite popped off just yet. And he was always a player that was going to have to take a little bit longer to adjust to NHL stardom than some other players from that draft class.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Fantilli's in a great situation over in Columbus, and he's poised to take over the team as the primary kind of offensive driver moving forward. So yeah, it's going to look pretty interesting in a couple of years for Columbus. You know, the more we look at this prospect pool that we have in front of us here on our list, the better it looks. So yeah, absolutely, he's been doing great. Let's talk about Kent Johnson for a moment. You know, he had a tough year last year, was scratched at times, played a lot in the AHL as well. But this year so far, since being called up from the AHL, he's been an absolute monster. I mean, he's got 12 points in 12 games since his call-up. He's been playing decent minutes as well. Still the exciting, dynamic offensive force that he is. But the issues were always on the defensive side with Johnson. You know, he's very much offensive leaning. His skating has certainly improved. That was another of the concerns with Johnson in this draft year. But so far, he's been able to play inside structure a lot better, kind of follow the game plan a lot better. And that leads to better opportunities when you're playing under NHL coaches. It's great to be offensively skilled. It's great to be able to break structures with your skill and kind of separate from those tactics in order to find opportunities. But you still need to be able to follow a game plan. And so far, Ken Johnson has gotten a tiny bit better at that. And that's what's leading to these opportunities and to this uptick in production. How do you feel about Johnson in terms of his production and his kind of improvement since his draft year? Because I think we both had some pretty reasonable concerns about Johnson in his draft year, right?
He was always a very chaotic player. I mean, the puck skill, the dynamism were irreproachable going back to his D-1 season. But yeah, his entire draft cycle was always a kind of a question of balancing the risk and reward. And I think a lot of the concerns that we scouts had with Kent Johnson was if that balance was ever going to really calibrate. And it's seeming to do so at the moment of his development. I mean, he had a great rookie season in the NHL with 40 points in 79 games. Then the last year was so odd because he started the year in the AHL with Cleveland, dominated the AHL with 15 points in 10 games, and then did decently well upon returning to the NHL. But his confidence was certainly not what it was in his rookie season last year. But this year, he's been flying out of the gate. He picked up an injury earlier on in the year, but he's been really solid going back to November now, the last month, and he has I believe like 9 points in his last 10 games. As he mentioned, he has 12 points in 12 games so far this season. He's been a dynamic threat in Columbus's top six, kind of pinballing between the first and second line with the Blue Jackets. But wherever he is, he's constantly creating, but while also not overextending on plays the same way that he did so often in his draft year.
Yeah, I think that's a great progression in this game, and yeah, he's looking more and more reliable, efficient. We know he has the skill, the Michigan goals. We've seen him. He's got all that high-end talent, but it's really about how you play inside structure in the NHL. He's gotten way better at that. Finally, let's talk about Cole Sillinger. He was an interesting selection. Was drafted right after Tyler Boucher in the 2021 NHL draft. How's that been so far for Columbus? Because it looked absolutely amazing off rip, right? Like he made the NHL in his draft +1. Kind of surprised everyone with that, mainly due to his kind of mature style of play, his physical game as well being pretty polished. But what's it been like so far for him this season?
Yeah, it's been really interesting for Sillinger. I mean, I think it's easy to forget just how young this player still is because this is his fourth NHL season already, and he's 21 years old. He only turns 22 in May. Still a very, very young player. But so far this season, it's been the hottest start he's had to a season in the NHL so far in his career. 4 goals, 18 points in 25 games. He's been really exploring his passing game. He's been a lot more of a facilitator, whereas going back to his D+1, D+2 season in his draft year as well, he was always a shoot-first player. The shot with Sillinger has always been a very clear weapon. It has been his weapon of choice his entire hockey career pretty much. But the past year or so, he's been really exploring the passing game and really linking play between line mates rather than being the one to finish them off in the offensive zone. So you've seen him really round out his offensive game a lot in terms of supporting play rather than just trying to put the finishing touches on them. And his defensive play, as you mentioned, is also, I think, an area of strength with this player. He's physical. He gets engaged. He gets underneath opponents. He closes his gaps quickly. He's effective on the back check. He's not elite defensively by any means, but he gets involved, and especially for a 21-year-old player, he does more than you could ask of him to do. And he's been playing big minutes as well this season. He's been perpetually in Columbus's top 6. He's been scoring goals and putting up points against good teams. He had a 2-point night against the Edmonton Oilers the other night in a 6-3 loss. He's just been really solid for Columbus overall, and I've really liked how his game has kind of evolved since his draft year, because this isn't the same profile of player as he was in his draft year, right? Like, he really was that shoot-first player, but he's transformed his game into a lot more well-rounded and polished type of thing now. So very happy to see that progression being done also at the NHL level. So you're seeing more and more teams trying to develop their players in the NHL, and I think that Sillinger is an example of that going quite well for the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting to see him kind of develop into this well-rounded offensive player. He's got the high-end kind of two-way skill as well, kind of learning the defensive game on the fly. But, when you play in Columbus, I think the main concern for Columbus right now is how to teach these youngsters to take over the team and win as a group. Because a lot of them right now, what they're experiencing is kind of the same issue we've seen before with other teams, which is we're going to have this young roster, surround them with a couple of vets, but the youngsters aren't really kind of learning how to win as a group. But I think that'll come with time. In Columbus, they've got too many really, really good pieces, especially down the middle. Fantilli's probably going to be the leader of this team moving forward. And if he can learn to really kind of be the player they can lean on in difficult times, kind of like what Kirill Kaprizov and Mats Zuccarello have become in Minnesota, who've just been absolutely on fire this season. They know that whatever happens, they can fall back on Kaprizov, on Zuccarello, on Brock Faber, and things will be okay. I think the Blue Jackets could really benefit from a group like that if those players can become that. But that's our first segment done. We'll look into the AHL with the Cleveland Monsters and the prospects playing there. We'll talk about Denton Mateychuk, Gavin Brindley, and a lot more in just a second. But just before, a quick word from two of our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. I love a great deal just as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy, no hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it, and it turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider. So to get started, just go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. There you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with a high-speed data and unlimited talk and text service delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. To get this new customer offer for all of your new 3-month premium wireless plans for only $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speeds slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for details. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Gametime is the best place to secure them. Gametime is safe, secure, incredibly easy to use, and they are absolutely obsessed with saving you money. They've got deals at every step of the way to make sure you get the best price for your tickets, last-minute deals, zone deals, flash deals, and they have the Gametime guarantee that makes sure that if you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what Gametime has to offer you, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. I use Gametime all the time when it comes to shopping for tickets. My schedule changes around a ton, and it's great to have a source that can get you cheap tickets last minute. Even an hour after the event starts, you can still get tickets over at Gametime. So it's really, really useful in that sense. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to the AHL, we've got a bunch of prospects to talk about here because the Columbus Blue Jackets have stacked the Cleveland Monsters with basically all of our prospects. So we'll talk first and foremost about Denton Mateychuk, who's been doing very, very well in the AHL so far after just absolutely ragdolling the WHL for the past couple of years. Talk me through his game, what makes him interesting, what's made him succeed so far in the AHL, all of that good stuff.
High-end intelligence. It really goes down to that with Denton Mateychuk. It's a combination of intelligence and playing at high pace on both sides of the puck. He's constantly hounding the puck, really high motor as a player. And I mean, we've seen him in the WHL leading for the forecheck night in, night out at times for the Moose Jaw Warriors. And while he has been playing that style of play in the AHL for good reason, that does not translate to the professional realm quite as well as it does in junior hockey. He's been playing very intense hockey, and I like how he's been closing off his gaps in the neutral zone. He's very aggressive as a defender, and he tries to leverage his mobility as well to just make spaces really tight and constrained for attackers rushing down his side of the ice. But it's the offensive side of the game that makes him really, really stand out. He's a fantastic puck mover, really good puck handler, so fluid in all of his movements, whether it's layering passes into deceptive handling moves or getting shots off while showing pass or vice versa. He's a really, really well-rounded player with the puck on his stick, and he's been quite daring as well as a rookie in the AHL this season. He's, I believe, second in points on the team, he's fourth in points on the team as a defenseman with 22 points in 23 games as a rookie, mind you, leading all AHL defensemen in points to this stage this season. And it's been just a really, really smooth transition. And I definitely think that with how good Mateychuk has been in the AHL, it was one of the big reasons that Columbus may have felt safe with moving on from David Jiricek. Of course, Mateychuk is a left shot defenseman. He's not as physical as Yurchuk is, different profiles. But in terms of having a blue chip defenseman in the reins that could be an NHLer by the end of this season, that definitely frees a team up to move on from a big player like David Jiricek. So I think that Mateychuk is a really key component of this roster, and certainly now the best blue liner in the entire system for the Blue Jackets.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that at this point. He's just absolutely phenomenal from the blue line there. And yeah, I remember him being like a big subject of conversation in his draft class. And I'm really glad that the Columbus Blue Jackets picked him up because he brings a style of play that even David Jiricek can't bring, and I don't think any of their NHL defensemen can bring. So having that, future high-end piece at the blue line is really, really good for the Blue Jackets. This is going to be, he's going to be a fantastic NHLer moving forward. But speaking of future fantastic NHLers, let's talk about Gavin Brindley for a second here, because Brindley has been pretty interesting this year. He's played 8 games so far for the Cleveland Monsters, scored 6 points, a goal and 5 assists. And his game has always been kind of playmaking leaning, but he's really kind of a really, really refined player, and is surprisingly physical and defensively sound forward for his size at 5'9", 160 pounds. He's a frail player in terms of the frame itself, but he uses it so well. I mean, inside positioning, he engages contact proactively, kind of gets defenders off of their center of balance on retrieval attempts. He kind of attacks their hands early when it comes to retrieval plays as well. The positioning, the hockey sense is really good defensively as well, right? Like, this is a prospect who has all the makings of a two-way forward moving forward, right?
He absolutely does. And I mean, that motor is one of the best that we've seen come through the draft in the last couple of seasons. It really sets him apart. And on top of just like the motor, the combination of an elite level motor with elite level speed in a straight line, as well as like in terms of like redirecting momentum, like when he goes for a cutback, he can create so much space and time for himself that he's really been learning since his draft year. Whereas in his draft year, he was often just a very straight line skater, single speed often, which was his top speed, which is really blisteringly fast, but lacks a bit of deception. He's gotten a lot better at kind of varying his speeds and making use of his skating to the absolute most. And I think that's been clear in the AHL so far. I don't think it's going to take him very long to be an NHLer full time either. The way he plays the game has NHL written all over it, and yeah. I'm looking forward to the day that he's reunited with his good buddy Adam Fantilli in the top 6 for the Blue Jackets. But speaking of high-end producers in the AHL, we really cannot skip over Luca DelBel Belluz, who in his second season of AHL hockey leads the team in points with 15 goals and 26 points in just 23 games. And he did that off the back of a really good rookie year last year too, scoring 31 goals in 58 games. But I've been really impressed with how he's been able to leverage the combination of shooting threat and handling ability at the AHL level. They've always been two of his strengths, but the way that he's been able to compensate for his subpar skating, putting it slightly lightly there as well, is really impressive. And I mean, this past stretch of 10 games for the player has been insane. 9 goals, 15 points in the last 10 games. He's been red hot for the Cleveland Monsters and certainly is a player to watch on the forward line there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's been a monster for them offensively, leads the team in points, and still kind of the, I think if you pull him in the NHL right now, I don't think he'll be as effective for sure, but it works really well for what he's able to do right now. Productive on the power play, really good from the half wall in the bumper spot, rotates a ton, offensively smart. He's got a bunch of details that work really, really well. To kind of quickly go through a couple of the other AHL prospects here on this list, James Malatesta has been doing really well. 12 points in 23 games in his first season there in Cleveland. Still kind of your kind of middle 6 to bottom 6 forward. I think that won't change in terms of what he ends up being in the NHL either. You also have a couple of defensemen there. Stanislav Svozil's at half a point a game. He's kind of your two-way defenseman with a bit more of a shutdown leaning. And Corson Kulemans as well has been playing in the AHL. Hasn't been doing too well. 4 points in 22 games, so he's kind of struggling on the point side. A lot of what makes AHL scoring high or low is a lot of deployment, right? So in terms of the minutes, Kuhlman's probably not getting a ton. But
he's played a decent amount actually with Denton Mateychuk. It's mainly, I think, in terms of the role. Like from what I've seen so far of the Cleveland Monsters, which has only been like 2 or 3 games this season, he has been playing in the top 4, but playing a purely defensive role. He patrols the neutral zone, he contains play, and he allows his partner to activate. So
yeah.
a lot of that Mateychuk production is coming from Kuhlman's holding down the fort defensively too.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what happens when you play with Mateychuk. You have to stay back because he'll hunt his own forechecks. Like he's going to be the one activating, and you have to work off of that for sure. But that's a glut of AHL players we wanted to talk about real quick. We'll get into the other prospects in the pool. So junior prospects like Cayden Lindstrom, Liga prospects like Oiva Keskinen, and a lot more. We'll get into that in a sec. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your swings on American football or European football, with the Champions League now running in full force, or perhaps you're not a football fan in any capacity and prefer tennis or golf, or maybe, just maybe, hockey is your sport of choice. If you're listening to this podcast, I think that might just be the case. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, so let's close things off here with our final segment. Look at the junior and other prospects in the Columbus Blue Jackets prospect pool. We'll start off with Cayden Lindstrom here, who has been injured so far this season. Basically is out for, an extended amount of time. I don't think there's an exact timeline on his return, but it's not going to be anytime soon. So updates on that side are going to have to wait. But Lindstrom as a prospect, still worth talking about, right?
Totally. He was drafted 4th overall for a reason. He's a hulking centerman, and while yes, I think that the injuries are a concern. Not playing any hockey by the time that December of your D+1 rolls around isn't ideal, but he's just such a fantastic, intelligent, creative two-way player. With the puck on his stick, whether it's the handling skill, the playmaking, the goal scoring especially, there's so many standout parts of his offensive toolkit, and you add to that the utter peskiness that is playing against Cayden Lindstrom. He is not a fun player to play against at all. He's physical, he's nasty, he's the kindest of people off the ice, but he's anything but on the ice when the competition ramps up. He's a player that you want on your team come playoff time. Of course, staying healthy is paramount for his development and his value at the NHL level, but I wouldn't be too concerned at this stage. He's still just an 18-year-old kid. We'll see how things even out, but I'm curious to see how he'll look once he is back playing in the WHL for the Medicine Hat Tigers. The combination of him and Gavin McKenna is probably the best in the entire WHL, so really hoping that they can be reunited shortly. But what are kind of your hopes for this season for Cayden Lindstrom once he does return from injury? I assume it's going to take a little bit of time for him to get rolling again, but what could Columbus Blue Jackets fans hope to see from his progression this year?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of the progression, learning how to play with highly skilled players like Gavin McKenna is going to be very important for him because he's very much a drive the net, play hard, move hard, kind of do everything at your highest possible level of energy and speed type of player, but learning to slow down the game, learning to play a bit more of that give and go kind of subtle kind of finesse game is going to be very important for him because if he can bring that in a 6'4" frame with the level of pace, with the level of energy and physicality that already has, it's going to be phenomenal for his game. We know he's a deft passer, but he passes at high speeds. We know he's a deft shooter, but he also shoots at high speeds. I'm looking to see what Lindstrom does with a lower kind of pace level. I need to see different gears. I don't like prospects who have one gear and it's first gear, but there's also some merit to having multiple gears when your only gear is fourth gear, right? There needs to be some sort of balance there. So I'm looking forward to see how Lindstrom kind of works with that. So it's going to be very interesting for his kind of progression. There's also a couple of very interesting prospects in the OHL as well, doing pretty good. The two Lucas, Luca Morelli and Luca Pinelli, have been pretty good. I think both of them have earned World Juniors call-ups, right, to the camp, or is it just Pinelli? I think Morelli got called up too, right?
I know Pinelli got called up. I wouldn't be shocked if Morelli had as well. I maybe want to check that out.
Yeah, while you check that out, just to give you the breakdown on Morelli, he's got 50 points in 40 games. He's been doing absolutely phenomenal in the OHL. This absolutely tearing, well, not 50 and 40, it's 40 and 30, right? It's 40 and 30. Yeah, okay, I'm not confused. It's 40 and 30, and he's doing that from the blue line, playing a very, very important role for his team over in the OHL. Overall, he's always been this offensively gifted kind of player, but didn't really get too much of an opportunity to let that shine last year in his draft year, but still got selected by the Columbus Blue Jackets, and so far that decision has been looking very, very good for them. So yeah, has he been a call-up for the World Juniors roster?
He is not. He was beaten out by Cameron Allen. So that's
certainly a decision.
That's a decision that was made. But he's been very good for Oshawa, as you mentioned. But to move on to Luca Pinelli, a player that I've watched more of than probably any other NHL prospect today in terms of live viewings. A player I like a bunch, and that has been called up to the World Junior selection camp for Team Canada, to the surprise of many, especially considering the names that were not brought, like Michael Misa, for instance. But Pinelli is a goal-scoring leader of a player, high motor, never gives up on plays, keeps his feet moving, and the shot has just been dominant at the OHL level. He was, I believe, third in OHL scoring last year with 48 and 68. He's again towards the top of that list this season with 20 goals in 25 games for the Ottawa 67s, and he has really been the offensive driver of that team. It's been him and Henry Muse in terms of generating offense and limited value beyond that pairing for the 67s this season. And Pinelli is a really smart, intense, goal-scoring centerman who can put in some effort defensively, is an underrated playmaker, in my opinion. He's just been mainly playing with playmakers, so he's been adopting the goal-scoring role in recent seasons, and a really solid prospect for the Blue Jackets. He's not a slam dunk NHLer. I mean, this is an undersized forward that we're talking about that always comes with his own fair share of question marks at 5'9" and 168 pounds. He certainly isn't the biggest guy, but give him a couple years in the AHL, and I think that you're getting a really reliable depth scorer in a bottom six capacity in the NHL someday. But to move on to the next ones, let's talk about William Whitelaw in the NCAA, who's, I believe, at half a point a game this season, right?
Yeah, for sure. He plays for the University of Michigan. He was one of the multiple freshmen to join their ranks this year. Played on and off on a second line of Michael Hage before Hage got called up. Then when Hage got called up, Whitelaw kind of tapered off production-wise, but he's still very, very skilled, high-end playmaker, really, really solid hands. But there's still a lot of question marks around his off-puck game, his off-ice situation. There's a lot of things going on around William Whitelaw, and I don't think that'll really I don't think that tampers his upside really that much, but his off-puck game really needs to come some ways. Very much a get the puck and try something type of forward. But I want to see a bit more from him. We also need to talk about Charlie Ellick, who's a massive right shot defenseman who they just drafted this past year. Not really much going on production-wise, but he's still a defensive stalwart. Haven't seen enough progression so far, but we're talking about one off season and a couple months of draft play, of junior play. So it's quite normal that we haven't seen anything major from Ellick, who is already a pretty polished defensive player. I want to see a bit more activation, a bit more offensive dare, but he's still a stalwart from the blue line, shoots the lights out of the puck from that blue line, and creates a lot of opportunities for his teammates. But I think the most interesting of this bunch is Oiva Keskinen, who was drafted in the 7th round in 2023, and so far is almost at a point per game in Finnish Liga, right?
Yeah, Oiva Keskinen has 20 points in 29 Liga games so far this season, coming off a fantastic rookie season last year where he put up 27 points in 54 games right after being drafted in the 7th round by the Blue Jackets in 2023. So very quick progression for Keskinen. He's been moving up the lineup with Tappara in Liga, playing 16, 17, 22 minutes a night some nights, really playing a big role for that team and bringing a lot of speed and playmaking ability to the equation. In terms of NHL upside, I definitely think that we're looking at a player that could play minutes someday now, which I had not thought in his draft year. So a really good find for the Blue Jackets scouting staff here. But I still think he's going to need a couple seasons to really adjust. He's a decent enough frame, I guess, at 6 feet, 181 pounds. He's not a small forward by any means, but I think adding a little bit more weight and being able to play through contact a little bit better would serve him very well once he does make the adjustment to the NHL. But to wrap up the segment and the show, we have two more goaltenders here to talk about. And let's start off here with Sergei Ivanov, who was a 5th round selection in 2022 by Columbus. An interesting profile for a goaltender. He's 6 feet tall, 157 pounds, very undersized as far as netminders are concerned, but he's been playing fantastic hockey these past 2 seasons. Last year, playing with Admiral Vladivostok in the KHL, he played 33 games and had a .928 save percentage as a 19-year-old. And this season, he's been playing with HK Sochi, which is not one of the KHL's best teams. And he's put up a .906 save percentage with a pretty rough record ahead of him with 6 wins and 14 losses. So the team isn't good, but he's playing some solid hockey. Not quite as dominant as last season, but it's also a worse team than he played on last year. So very interesting player. But to wrap up the show, Hattie, talk me through Evan Gardner, who was an interesting prospect on the goaltending side last season and has been off to a pretty good start this year, right?
Yeah, for sure. He plays for the Saskatoon Blades in the dub. Had a really great record last year. 920 plus save percentage, was very, very solid in the crease. But when you look at his game, technically in terms of, the abilities, the on-puck kind of confidence and comfort, there's a lot of questions, more questions than answers for sure when it comes to what Gardner brings to the game. Not particularly mobile, not particularly strong technically, kind of just average across the board. But so far, it works really well. I think his best attribute is his mental kind of processing of the game. Reads the game really well, almost always in the right positions, almost always tracking the puck really well. So, you can't count out these players that are smarter and end up having better production than what their tools would suggest. Whether they're forwards, defensemen, or goalies, that's still the same case. So I wouldn't count them out. He's been looking pretty good this year. The numbers have taken a bit of a dip. That's mainly because Saskatoon's a bit less of a good defensive team this year. But we'll see how his kind of progression continues. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going around sports and what's happening around the sporting world. And make sure to tune in for our future shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of December. This has been Hattie Kalikesh with Sebastian High. We hope you have a great holidays, and we hope you tune in next time.